Welcome to Perspectives El Paso. I'm Leon Blevins, Professor of Government at El Paso Community College. The guest that I have today in the literary world was recently named as one of the 100 most influential Irish Americans by a magazine called Irish America. His name is Lawrence or Larry Welsh. He is a professor of English at El Paso Community College, and his wife, Lisa McDeal, is in the field of speech and drama. And she and I performed together, by the way, at Community College. So it's great to have our guest today. Larry, welcome to the program.
Welcome. Thanks, Leon. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And when I saw this in the newspaper, I knew I just had to have you on the program with me. I'd seen you in the hallway, visited with you from time to time, and knew that you were a writer. And that made me think about maybe getting you on someday. This cinched it. You must be on. How do you get to be one of the 100 most influential Irish Americans in this whole country?
Well, I don't know.
Was it an accident?
No, it wasn't an accident. Years ago, I knew of the magazine, and I had sent a part of a novel to the editor. Because I was trying to get a new literary agent in New York City, and she read a part of the novel and liked it, and then she wrote back to me. And when I had originally sent the material to her, I'd kind of let her know where I had published, how much I had published. I gave her just like a CV of my work, what I'd been doing over the years. And then over the years, I just kind of kept her updated on things because, she wrote back and she told me she dug it. And at that time, she couldn't get me an agent, which was all right, but she liked my work. And so every time I had a book come out, I'd send it to her, or when news of a new publication had come out, I'd, let her know. And then when she found out that my 8th book of poetry was being published by the University of New Mexico Press, and that it was going to be a retrospective of my work, out of nowhere someday I got this message over the internet that she was inducting me into the top 100 Irish Americans for 2011.
That's wonderful. That's this book, your retrospective.
Yes, sir.
The title is?
Begging for Vultures, New and Selected Poems, 1994 to 2009.
Okay, so she is the one that recommended you for that. Now, has this magazine been doing this 100 list over the years, or this is the first time they've done it?
I think they've done it for about 20 years. Irish America magazine is one of the leading publications that deals with all things Irish and American. They're in New York City. It's very, very heavily based in a New York sort of vibe.
Okay.
They also have what's called a weekly newspaper that's a standard bearer for the community called the Irish Voice. That's a weekly newspaper that's out of New York City. New York City has 2 weekly papers that just deal with Ireland. One's called the Irish Voice and the Irish Echo, and all these newspapers deal with are the Irish experience and the Irish American community.
Okay, now you and I have discussed previously about your background in South Central Los Angeles.
Yes.
And my father worked in the Los Angeles area for many years for General Motors, assembly plant. And I used to do a great deal of walking in that part of Los Angeles, South Central, go to Exposition Park, the Coliseum, the universities through that area. And they lived right on the line between Linwood and Compton, California. My question to you at this point, how long did you live in that area? Were you born in that area?
Yeah, I was born in South Central Los Angeles, right off the intersection of Normandy and Manchester, 1424 West 90th Street.
Okay.
So I was born there in 1959, and I lived in that neighborhood in South Central for 20 years. When I turned 20 years old, I moved out of there and got my first apartment with a bunch of buddies down in Del Rey, where I'd gone to high school, Playa Del Rey. Lived there for 6 months, then got an apartment where I lived on the Inglewood-Westchester line for 13 years, then had one apartment in East Hollywood for a year, and then at the age of 34, I moved to El Paso.
Now, how this relates to riding. I did a great deal of walking, hitchhiking, riding the bus, the electric streetcars, and all of that. And I made up stories, and I wrote things, and essays and things, even high school and college. Tell me about that. Didn't those life experiences give you a basis for what you have written about?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Not a day goes by where I don't remember Los Angeles. It could be Redondo Beach, it could be Inglewood, it could be South Central, it could be Hawthorne, it could be Lawndale, it could be Wilmington, it could be Long Beach. Not that I obsess about it, but after 34 years there, yeah, it's a huge part of who I am. And I've done a lot of writing and a good bit of publishing about memories of Los Angeles.
How did you end up then in El Paso?
When I was 30 years old, I had already by that time, I had graduated from the university. I went to Cal State Long Beach, and I was making my living as a daily newspaper reporter. I was a journalist in college, and I'd gotten a job on a paper out in the South Bay. And I started working as a daily newspaper reporter. I quit that after a while, got a bit frustrated with it because I was already starting to try and write fiction and poetry. And then I went into public relations. I got a very high-powered job at about the age of 28 at one of Los Angeles' most respected PR agencies in Brentwood, California, and I was writing speeches for the heads of corporations. I was writing press releases, doing all the stuff that a PR man does. And I was very frustrated with it because I wanted to do more creative writing, and I felt like I was kind of losing myself. So at the age of 30, I walked into the boss one day, and I was lucky enough I was still single. I had a very low overhead in my life, and I just told her I quit. I'm sick of this type of life and this sort of work. And within 2 days, a roommate of mine put me out on Interstate 10 outside of Los Angeles with a backpack and a hitchhiking sign. And I hitchhiked, this was 1989, I hitchhiked first into Indio, California, and then made it to Flagstaff. And about 3 or 4 days later, I hitchhiked into El Paso, Texas, and discovered El Paso at that time.
Well, you and I are soul brothers because 30 years before, I hitchhiked around the United States, about 12,000 miles.
Fantastic.
And you learn so much just from doing that. You meet so many interesting people and pick up on ideas from them. How did you get then into poetry? Do you remember the first poem you wrote?
I do. I had a girlfriend who was, when I'm a product of the community college too. I started going to the what they called a junior college in Los Angeles, and I started getting into writing, and I decided I was going to be a journalist, and she was a creative person who's gone on to become a pretty successful novelist, and she used to work for the Los Angeles Times, and we used to always talk about literature and things, and she bought me my first copy of the selected poems of Paul Verlaine, the French poet, on the University of California Press. And I remembered at that time in my life, I was so into fiction, but I also loved poetry. I started to devour poetry because it was something quick that I could do. I could finish a poem before going to bed at night. And then one poet led to another, to another, to another, to another. It's much like how when I got into jazz, one jazz musician led to another, to another, to another, and next thing I knew, I had 1,000 jazz albums. So it's the same kind of with poetry. One writer led to another, and I'm still doing that nowadays. I'm digging deeply, and I read every day, and I'm always on the lookout for new people.
Now, you come following the Beat generation. Did you read Kerouac and Ginsberg or any of those?
Sure. Kerouac changed my life. I was, 1982, I was at the Hollywood Palladium seeing The Clash in concert, the legendary English punk band. But I'd seen The Clash several times before that, the first time in Los Angeles in 1979 on the Take the Fifth tour. But I was at the Hollywood Palladium, and Joe Strummer came out on stage, the lead singer of The Clash, and he threw out a copy of a book to the audience, and he said, "There's Jack Kerouac's manifesto, there's On the Road, there's your American ideal." And he threw it to the audience, and I turned to my girlfriend at the time and I said, "Who's Jack Kerouac?" And she said, "You don't know who Jack Kerouac is?" And I said, "No, but I'm willing to learn." And then 3 days later, she'd bought me a copy of On the Road, and one beat led to another over the years, where I had discovered so many of them, and in fact some of them I even ended up being friends with and having epistolary writing relationships with some of the beats.
Well, I was not into the beatnik situation. I had a granddaughter one time asked me, well, a daughter actually asked me if I was ever hippie. I said, no, I was more like a preppy. I was always neat and clean and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
But I was aware of it and around them and so. A number of years ago, I was pulling a little trailer. It was kind of a Woodstock trailer up through New Mexico.
Yes.
And came to Madrid, New Mexico, and stopped and went in some of the shops, and my trailer was parked next to a rundown fence. And as I started getting out of the car, this woman jumps through the fence, and she says, "Boo." I said, "Boo to you too." She says, "Boo, who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm Big Tex Blevins. That's my license plate."
Right,
Big
right.
Tex Blevins. She said, "You want to come in?" I said, "Sure." She looked like a hippie.
Right.
So I go in. She takes me into this house, which was a communal house, and a couple of people were lying over there naked on a little pallet. Others were sitting over there and smoking a little pot.
All right.
And some of them were reading poetry or writing poetry and stuff. That was the true hippie generation. Many people had gone to New Mexico to do this.
Of course.
Do your own thing.
Of
and
course.
Became well known
What
for this.
year was that, Leon? Do you
This
remember?
would have been about 88, 89, somewhere in
Sure.
there. So some of those had been around for a number of years up in there.
Sure.
And I told my students here, what is this? And I said, yeah, there's still some hippies up in New Mexico.
There's still some communes. I've become, I don't want to say a fanatic, but I've done a lot of studying about that area, and I'm fascinated with it. A few years ago, Cinco Puntos Press put out a book called Scrapbook of a Taos Hippie by Iris. I think her last name, I hope I get it right, is called Meltz. Anyway, it's an incredible introduction to the whole northern New Mexico communal hippie scene, and I devoured that book. And with like anything, one thing leads to another. I'm very good friends with Peter Rabbit and Annie McNaughton, who are two Taos hippies who were actually, Peter Rabbit came to Taos in 1954. So he was like one of the first like beats before the hippie movement. And I've made quite a few friends with a good few people in Santa Fe and Taos, and a lot of writer friends in Albuquerque. So I'm fascinated with the whole northern New Mexico commune hippie movement, and of course the way it related to the Native Americans and the native Spaniards who had been there for, let's say, 1,000 years.
Well, the reason I raised this because when I was in school, it was all rhyme and meter and all of that stuff. And then the hippie and the beat generation comes along, less conventional, less traditional and orthodox.
Yes.
Do you like that? You like it spontaneous and without having everything to rhyme?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I like all sorts of poetry. I like rhyming poetry, but starting with writers certainly like Robert Creeley and Charles Olson, these godfathers of the modernist, postmodernist movement, William Carlos Williams, Gertrude Stein, and so on and so forth. Lew Welsh, Kerouac, David Meltzer, Ann Waldman, so many of these people. Yeah, I mean, I like poetry to be open too. I like it in regards to rhythm. I like it in regards to beat. I like it in regards to meaning. I also like a lot of the language poets nowadays who a lot of people don't dig or people think are very controversial, where they just might write a poem that just deals with mood and essence and may not mean anything, but I can look at a poem myself like a painting, like a work of modern art or an abstract painting or a song, and I dig it.
Would you like to read at least one poem from your work?
Yeah, I can. You want me to read something about
It's your
Ireland?
choice. Your choice, yes.
All right.
It's Irish America. Let's read something about Ireland.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever read this one before, but I'll read it. This is a poem that deals a little bit with Irish America, and it's called New Irish Whiskey. New Irish Whiskey. An ad tonight for Michael Collins's Irish Whiskey. The big fella, it says. My God, I think of Crazy Horse malt liquor and its disappearance. But I will not drink my heroes now. I will not puke or genuflect on their graves. I will not dishonor with pain with the blackness of what we become. Whiskey wreck, to name him whiskey. Who can savor must not drink his name, his memory. Alcoholic, he might have said, do not remember me by what killed me so.
Why did you write that poem?
Oh, I wrote that poem coming out of New Mexico. I was in a liquor store with my wife, and she had to buy some wine for a friend back in El Paso. And I was in this liquor store coming out of Santa Fe, and they had all these ads for this new Irish whiskey. Michael Collins was one of the great cultural figures of Ireland after the Easter Rising. And so they had a picture of him on this bottle for Irish whiskey, and I was kind of blown away. And of course what I thought with the Irish of how great it is that there's an Irish whiskey named after him, but also what a tragedy it is too, because alcohol has caused a lot of tragedy for my people, as it has for the Native Americans. And I love my people so much. I love my blood. I love my roots. But there's also a legacy there of tragedy and pain with the Irish.
And that's been written about a great deal.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And so when I write about Ireland, whatever comes,
All right. Okay, we want to make a transition a bit now. I know that you're a good friend of someone I've had on this show, Bill Rackesee.
Yes.
And his artwork now is here at Community College in the Administrative Service Center, Building B. And you and your wife, Lisa, had something to do with getting that collection placed here. Tell me about how you developed a friendship with this well-known artist here.
Well, it was, I've been in El Paso 17 years. And I was new in town, and I went into the Hal Marcus Gallery, the old location on Mesa Street. And at that time they had a retrospective of Rackesee's work, I think a 25-year retrospective. And I went in, and like anyone, I'd certainly been to art galleries in Paris and Madrid and all around the world, New York, and I love art. I would not say that I'm certainly the world's greatest art critic, but I know enough about art. And I saw his paintings and I fell in love with them. He reminded me of someone who had taken the work of expressionism and impressionism, American realism, and put it out in the desert and had it all baked by the sun, and that he had developed this individualistic painting style that I fell in love with.
And you love the Southwest.
Yeah, I mean, like anywhere. I love El Paso. El Paso has problems. The Southwest has problems, but I dig the Southwest.
I want to show you something. Bill Rackesee gave me several books, and here's one of them. In fact, you can see that it has a lot of water damage. Remember, he had a flood.
Yes, and a fire.
And a fire, and he still stayed on top of it.
Yeah.
He never gave up. He just...
he paints every day.
And paint. Never slow down, never stop. Okay, so I put some markers in here. Here's a marker, and it shows of some of the work of Bill Rackesee. Look at this. And we'll take a chance for getting our producer, Marco Lara, to get a better view of this so we can show it on the screen. But you can see this is some of the kind of pictographs that you see out at Waco tanks or something.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got you a little assignment here.
Yes.
Look at that.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be truly spontaneous and make a great poem out of it, but let's say that's your starting point. You saw a whiskey bottle and you decided to write a poem. Now you see some pictographs. What could you do with that to make a poem out of it?
Well, normally what
How would you develop a poem from that picture? You don't have to give me one right now. How would you develop a poem from that picture?
I'd just take off writing. One of the things that I do, Leon, that would help me is every day I meditate for a half hour. And so when I come out of a meditation / prayer session
Right.
for a half hour, if I see like an image, I will take off and free write from it. And I try and do that every day. So I would see one of the, like this mask here, and maybe write a poem about the mask. But it has to be, spontaneous and something that has caught my imagination. But certainly the snake, the mask, and man is a title here. I could riff on that.
Right. Well, that's what there's another one there with another paper clip somewhere in there, and you can go a little further over. Let me see if we can spot it.
See, and these are like his hieroglyphic works.
Yes, and some of the photographs that he's taken at Mogollon and other places.
But once again, one of the things with Rackesee is this is just kind of like a small snippet of what he does. He's been painting for so many years, 50 years every day, that God, he shifts into so many different grooves.
Now, you write every day, right?
Yes, I try to.
You try to write. Your preference in time, early morning, late evening, a location where you like to be when you're writing?
Yeah, it depends. As I'm married, Lisa and I are married. We have a couple of young kids. We have a real, full life. We're
Right.
both professors. So I try and get it done whenever I can get it done. If I'm working on a piece of fiction or essays or something like that, maybe late at night, I'll try and just at least put my hand into it, maybe a page. When it's poetry, what I try and do is, after I come out of a prayer and meditation session, I do automatic writing for maybe a few minutes, and I can get a poem generally. Carl Sandburg, the great American poet, talked about writing one poem a day, and that's what I've tried to do for at least the last 20 years, maybe 25 years, is write one poem a day. Now, whether it's any good or not really doesn't concern me.
Right.
I'm just trying to stay in the groove, and the more that I write and stay in the groove, I think the more I can tap into the groove and maybe get something occasionally that's worthwhile, or that I think's worthwhile.
Right. Now, what subject or subjects do you think have been most meaningful to you in your writing? Death? Transfiguration? What?
I'm a Catholic. I mean, I was raised an Irish Catholic, so sure, the Transfiguration is huge. Death is a theme. The Southwest, that incorporates so many of those things. Sometimes just being in the desert and trying to tap into the desert is a big thing to me, because the desert is such an incredible spiritual place. The grittiness of the border, the realism of the border, Ireland, and being Irish American and growing up in South Central Los Angeles, reflecting on my friends back there. So it's all, and sometimes just looking out my window.
You're eclectic.
Yeah. I mean, I let it flow. Sometimes it's just looking out our window. We're lucky enough that from our backyard, we can see Mexico, New Mexico, and Texas. So sometimes I can just be out there looking at the Mesa of Anapra and looking at Cristo Rey, and I'm kind of tripping out because, right? I mean, the smoke and the dust and the shadows, and it's a pretty incredible place, the border is.
You love words. You're a wordsmith, right?
Well, I wrestle with words.
Wrestle with words.
Yeah.
Do you have the experience to ever wake up early in the morning and you have an idea and you just get out of bed and go put it down before you forget it?
Yes. Yeah, I do that, Leon. I'll do it sometimes from dreams. Or sometimes, a lot of times what will happen in my early days in El Paso is I do a lot of hiking in the desert. So I have a hat and water and all those things that I need, a lot of sunscreen because of being white and being Irish American, and poems will come to me in the desert, or titles will come to me in the desert, and no matter when I hike, I always have a pen with me and paper so I can write while I hike if I need to,
Okay.
if that makes any sense.
Now, you share these experiences with your classes. What kind of English classes do you teach?
Well, I teach, and I don't share a lot. I've never really shared my own work with my students.
Oh,
Certainly,
really? Okay.
I will share life experiences with them. I teach English 1301, which is freshman composition for years, and I teach basic English composition, English 0310, and then usually I teach a literature class. This semester I have a class, the drama and literature, and sometimes I'll teach a fiction class. And over the years for different places I have taught creative writing and lectured on poetry and stuff, but those are the main things that I do at the community college.
Now, you're in your 50s, you said.
Yeah, I'm 52 years old.
And you've seen a change in some of the things that you found interesting to write on when you were younger compared to the 50s? Are you finding some, what we might call more mature themes in life and the changes that people have in life as they struggle with life as they move into the 50s and you're looking toward 60s?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the greatest things that ever happened to me as a writer was getting married. I was 40 years old when I got married, and for the first and only time to Lisa McNeil, and then having my 2 children. They just seem to open a lot of new vistas and worlds to me. Wow. And in a sense, I have been forced to grow up, although sometimes Lisa will tell me, my wife, that I still seem a lot like I'm 18 years old and still on the beach in Southern California.
Well, our time is just about gone, so we know that you have a great future ahead of you, and maybe you will continue to be listed as one of the 100 most influential Irish Americans in the whole United States. Congratulations.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, Leon. It was a pleasure.
It's wonderful. You want to give a telephone number?
Yes, if anybody wants any information about anything, they could call me at the college at 831-2537.
Very good. Thanks for being here. And thanks for watching another program we call Perspectives El Paso.